We're on to our discussion item for this evening, Danbury High School mid-year grading. Dr. Pasquarello, just to set the stage, at the last meeting, we were getting some information from Dr. Pasquarello regarding the events as they took place for midterm grading. There were some questions raised by board members for further clarity, and so I will just turn it over to Dr. Pasquarello.
Thank you. In your packet, you have some information from us in terms of the explanation of the background. One of the questions about policy, we do have a policy that we follow. There was no breach of policy. The question comes in terms of what was done, why it was done, some of the timing issues. The submissions also discussed and mentioned about validity and what have you. We'll have those conversations. But for the board's edification knowledge, we are under the supervision of the Commissioner of Education. We are also through Mr. Mike Wasta, Dr. Wasta. He's a gentleman who is supervising the district. Danbury High School is on that list of monitors. So what I did was take the information and send it up to the Commissioner and also send it to Dr. Wasta for their input and to their purview. And from their feedback to me, and as reported to you, they saw no issues with what was done. The state does not get involved in local issues. That was Dr. Coleman did mention that to us. However, because in tangentially we have this TDEC plan, he felt that he would make a comment. That's the comment he made here. Right or wrong, indifferent, I felt it was important for us to send that to them, seeing how they are our supervisors, in essence, over and above the board that sets policy. But Bill has met with Dr. Rossi, as indicated by the parent. There has been some things that changed and went back, and I think some clarity might help. We might not all come to an agreement, but there is some background information that would be helpful.
Sure. First of all, just I think the board has this, referred to it earlier. You probably have a color-coded version with folks out there. This just demonstrates how disruptive this winter was, has been, and probably will continue to be for some time because we're not through it yet. One of the issues embedded in the conversation that we believe merits additional discussion, because it's philosophical in nature, is this issue that was raised about what's the lowest score we give, is it a 50 or is it a 0? So the statement was made, I understand the statement, that I'd like to not go to work and get 50% of my pay. My hunch is there are probably a lot of folks would appreciate that arrangement as well. The difference for us, though, is this is school, this is not work. And when we sat and looked at this very carefully, we also communicated with and had a conversation with the Commissioner of Education, asking him for his statewide perspective. Same thing with Dr. Wasta. Also with the center I mentioned earlier, the Center for Leadership and Learning, which is a national organization in Massachusetts. Dr. Doug Reeds is the head of that. They work in scores of school systems, and they are probably the strongest proponents of the 50 versus a 0 argument in the country. Let me see if it's a little bit convoluted. Let me see if in very easy terms I can unpack this for you, because it's easy to get caught up in the math. Just a couple of quick points. One is we have no entrance criteria other than you have to live here. So what happens is the group of youngsters that we get in, huge discrepancies across the board, just about everything you can think of. Height, weight, eye color, anything you can think of. Academic capability, athletic capability. We take all kids who come through our doors. And our sole criterion for moving those kids forward is to do the right thing for each kid. It's all about the kids on our banner. Gray areas that are definitely subject to conversation and debate, and we think it's an appropriate debate to have. The first one is this idea of an F versus a 0. Let me see in very simple terms. The prelude to this is simple terms, because my math is not going to be 100% right. It's easier this way. If you look at the thinking behind an 80 being 100 to a 90, a 10-point spread. So if you get anywhere between 100 and 90, you get an A. Roughly a 90 is actually 89 to 80, you get a B. So 100 to 90, A, 90 to 80, B, 80 to 70, C, 70 to 60, D, 60 to 50, another 10-point gap is an F. Or it could be 60 to 0. So where you have 10 points, 10 points, 10 points, 10 points, and you have 60 points. And mathematically, let me just give you a little quick example of this. If you have a student who comes in, and we have many kids, as you so well know, who have extreme challenges in their life, and some kids who don't are just apathetic and just aren't ready to really apply themselves in the school setting. How many parents have had report cards come home saying, little Johnny, little Elio doesn't apply himself, but he's fully capable, he's not doing it yet. If that youngster has 4 test grades, the first is a 0, the second is a 70, so showing pretty good growth from getting nothing and doing nothing up to a 70. The third is an 80, and the fourth is an 85. When you average those scores together, you come out with 58, that student gets an F. So in spite of pretty dramatic growth on the part of the youngster, 0 to 70 to 80 to 85, the kid fails for the semester. If you give the kid a 50, with the recognition, did you actually earn this? No, you didn't do anything in the worst case scenario. If we give that youngster a 50, which is our lowest score, and the student gets the same grades, a 50 to a 70 to an 80 to an 85, student gets a 71, which is just about the lowest number you can get to still get a C. When we talked to Dr. Coleman, his conversations around the concept of opportunities for recovery. To make sure that we give kids as many opportunities to recover as possible. Does it play out in the world of work? It absolutely does not. I would not want to come before the board and say, I actually didn't do anything for the past 2 months, but give me a shot at recovering. I don't think it would really. Our job, though, as educators, is to teach the skills of independence. Our kids don't have them when they come in. Very few, actually, I think maybe do. The vast majority are independently self-directed learners. So if we're trying to give kids every benefit of the doubt, every chance to be successful, so that when they graduate 12th grade, and they graduate on the 13-year plan, kindergarten through 12, and they're staying back, we kind of throw them out of the nest and say, we work with you to help you develop the skills of independence. And you have a lot of falls on the way, you stumbled a lot, but through your hard work and the work of the adults who care about you, we've been able to pull you through. Is it a perfect argument? Is it a black and white argument? In my opinion, absolutely not. I think there are still folks on our staff that say, the kid doesn't do anything, I give the youngster a score that's commensurate with that. 0 work equals 0 credit. And it makes sense. There's clearly an argument for that. At the same time, I think there's a more compelling argument, and one that is really being promoted throughout the country, that says we're really about helping kids to be successful, not about identifying, slapping them, saying you messed up and there's no chance you're going to recover from this. So it's a debate that I think is appropriate. We think it's appropriate to have at the board level. The other piece that it tends to be, in my opinion, very controversial and easily can set people off, and I understand that and I mean that very respectfully. Statement that I made, let me personalize this for a moment, but it's one that's shared by the vast majority of our colleagues, is that grading is subjective. For the most part, grading is subjective. So what does that mean? If you randomly picked 100 teachers from across the country, or randomly picked one of your teachers that you had as a student, and said, did that teacher ever give you a B? Have you ever earned a B? Virtually 100% of the time people do what Susan's doing and say, sure. 100% of the educators, when we ask our folks in Danbury, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of teachers, you ever give a B? Sure I did. So there's agreement that we as a community give Bs. Yes, we do. Is there an agreement that your B and your B and your B and your B and your B, so on and so forth, is the same? Absolutely not. Well, what do you mean by that? And this is a real example taken not too long ago. Teacher A, I give a B or any grade based on the following criteria. 25% of the grade goes for classroom participation, 25% goes for tests and quizzes, 25% goes for homework, and 25% goes for projects. It's sort of a typical kind of dynamic. Another teacher in Danbury said, absolutely not. 40% is for projects, because it's really about hands-on learning with me. 30% is about tests and quizzes, so that's 70% of the grade is projects and quizzes and tests. 20% for class participation, I only give 10% for homework. So a kid can get a B in your room with one formula and B in your room with another formula,
Are those the same? Absolutely not. It's a very subjective grading system. And we do not have a standards-based grading system in Danbury. Many school systems, I venture to guess, most school systems do not. Many school systems are moving in this direction. It causes great controversy among teachers. It takes away teacher rights. You know, it's the autonomy of me to say, what do I value more or less? Parents weigh in on this. I want to put this tests and quizzes on the refrigerator. I want to put a project out, you know, in the living room or something. You've also heard, I know I lived through this, my hunch is that each of us have. I'd rather have Mr. Smith than Mr. Jones because Mr. Smith is an easier marker. Does that happen? Each and every day in Danbury Public Schools, we have teachers who are easier, teachers who are harder. Is it because of their personality? I don't know, but I can give you one easy example of how this plays out. Mrs. Austin says, you work hard, you study for the test, 10-question test, you get 10 questions, see how you do. Mr. Glass says, same exact thing, 10-question test, and I'm going to give you a bonus question so you can earn extra points. And my hunch is we probably all had tests or quizzes where there's been a bonus question, an extra credit question. Not from every teacher, but typically from teachers who say, I want to give you the benefit of the doubt. Another option, I'm going to grade on a curve. I'm going to change the grading system for my class while someone else is not going to change and go with that. It's a tremendously subjective area. So when we start looking at what does an F mean, what does an A mean, what does a B mean, that's problematic in and of itself. When we look at how teachers assign grades, more problematic. And when you look at the DHS policy, here's an A is 100 to 90, a B is 89 to 80, so far so good, a C is 79 to 70, a D is 69 to 65. I can't explain why the metric has changed. Roughly 10 points, 10 points, 10 points, and 5 points. And an F goes from 64 all the way down. So it begs the question for responsible adults to look and see what we're doing with our kids and how do we become more objective with our grading procedures. And as was rightly stated by a member of the audience a couple weeks ago, I guess, that we use these grades to determine class rank, see who gets into which college, things like scholarship applications and so on and so forth. They're high stakes, definitely critical issues for us to answer, but the overarching question I think that we have to answer is a moral one, and that is, are we doing the right thing by our kids? So the argument that Dr. Rossi and I have made, and I stand behind it tonight, and I'm proud to stand behind it, is, and it's not one person's decision, clearly, so it's not mine to make, but it clearly is my argument to advocate for the idea that 50 should be the lowest grade that we give. And the rationale behind that is if we talk about it's all about kids, we need to stand behind that and say it's about giving you multiple opportunities. Even if you don't deserve them, you just haven't got it right yet. And our job as educators is to help you get back on that path and get it right in the future. Last part, segue back to Dr. Pasquarella. I was not a part of the other conversation about, you know, so what do we do with this mess, with this Swiss cheese? You know, Dr. Rossi, the department heads, the central office curriculum administrators, I think a number of the teachers, some students actually were all involved in the conversation, and Sal was part of it as well. So I need to segue back to Sal to talk about the other piece of the conversation about, you know, why we ended up doing what we did in the way from 20% to 10%, 20%, 10% back.
I think two things happened here. I laid out a letter to home parents on the 8th. Prior to the 2 days of the storm, I think that might have given the 6th day, there was an announcement that we'd have the finals, and they would be valued at 20%. You may recall at a board meeting, you had some students come in and say, let's vacate them, but wait, you know, let's not give them. They're not valuable because of all the major disruption. They didn't cover the curriculum. But the decision was made at the high school and with the department heads and others that they would give it a fight. And that's what it would look like. And after the 2 days occurred with the snow days, added snow days, there was some real intrepidation about what the exams would cover, how it would be covered. Backdropping to some other issue that a lot of us don't realize, there is a management system there when you have 3,300 students to turn in those grades, to get them in, to funnel them in, get them in, verify them, and then get them out because there were youngsters looking at scholarships and other things. That was an issue, that was a backdrop. So there was a discussion whether or not they should give exams at all, or perhaps have exams in classrooms and do it different. The other thing that happened, there's a number of items on our TDEC plan that required this new curriculum and reporting back to the state that had common exams. Prior to this, everybody gave a different exam. In algebra, if you had 20 sections, you had 20 exams. Not only did you have variations within the composite of who valued what components of the grade, you had different exams. So they were coming up with some common exams. They felt that had to be given for that. The decision was to give the grade, or to have the exams, and then to not injure students. There was a long discussion about how you might grade on a curve. And in fact, can we statistically create a curve that would take in all the variables? After a long conversation with the math people there and the science people there and the other folks, it really was very difficult to try to collect all the grades, give the exams, grade them, bring them back, and create a curve for every department, and get all of these things done in a timely fashion. There's where the idea came in about, well, we'll use the grade, the final grade of 20%, if it would assist the students. If not, we would simply take the work that they did do the first 2 quarters and average those things together and to issue that grade. With the AP, because it has a whole different curriculum, there were some other decisions about those. There was, most of them gave some in-class and then some take-home. And then as I talked to a teacher today, just asking them the impact, they actually, just an anecdote here, the way they gave the exams, they gave the take-home, and then what they're going to do is take samples from the take-home, and that's a quiz every week. So they're finding the kids are actually better prepared for the work now, the way they orchestrated this thing. But the decision was made during that time to administer the final, and then value it at 20% if, in fact, it would not negatively impact the students because of discontinuity of instruction. That was on, I think, a Thursday or Friday. On a Monday, there was a faculty meeting. I don't think there was a real discussion about it. There really was. There was sort of more of an announcement, and this was not an easy thing. There were those that didn't really care for it. There was a conversation about, was it really ethically the right thing to do? So, I mean, this was not done lightly at all. But the decision finally was made to give the exam and to weight it as it was discussed, and that's what they went ahead. Some communication went home that was different, I believe. Students were brought in and talked with because there were some groups of students that had other issues. So I think some of the messages went home differently, and I think that was accurate as the parents reported it. But did I find some unprofessionalism or some unethical activities? No, I did not. Would you all do it the same way? Maybe not. But that faculty decided, or that administration decided with our support to do it the way they did, because it did the least harm to the students in a bad situation. We did also research on the school districts, and there were a few systems that did away with the exams and did a whole different system. Not as many as I thought, but there were some that just vacated out and did not issue any exams at all. They went to first quarter, second quarter, averaged the grades, put it forward, and then they were just going to distribute the 20%. Most everybody's on the same grade to the final grade for a year-long course. Somebody had some work on that? No. Joyce, let me just get Joyce. She was involved in that.
Yeah. Dr. Rossi involved a number of individuals in terms of making the decision, including me, asked what the impact would have on youngsters with disabilities, with all the missing school, and certainly youngsters with disabilities need continuity of instruction and need the reinforcement perhaps more than many other students, and of course with some of the material not being able to be covered by the classroom teacher, youngsters with disabilities are least able to be able to independently learn. So, he certainly sought my input in terms of making the decision. And as Dr. Pasquarella said, it was a tough decision. When you start with January 7th and you look at the number of days we missed school, the number of late starts, the number of early dismissals. There wasn't a lot of instructional time, nor was there necessarily a lot of time even to team and to talk about these things and to bring students in. I reported back to Dr. Rossi after the 3 youngsters presented here at the board. He immediately brought those students in so that he could have a discussion with them. So it was a tough decision, but a lot of people had input into it, and as both Bill and Sal said, it did not harm any youngster. And you know, you look at our developmental assets, and we're here all, you know, we're all here for the youngsters, and we do want to be supportive of youngsters. And so one set of midterm grades and an 8th semester high school career certainly is a small piece of what youngsters experience at Danbury High School.
I think just to end it and have any questions. The kids earn these grades. These are not gifts. The 50 that Bill was talking about was done 2 years ago. That's not a current phenomenon. And it's something that's done pretty much across the country. That's not, you know, it's not that. There are districts that did away with grades. They have an anecdotal, they just write up a narrative on students. So there's, you know, the gamut is there. Again, this was not something done in a vacuum, something done within ranking. And again, there wasn't a large faculty conversation. It was a faculty meeting. It was sort of announced that what we're going to do. There was some feedback, some adjustments, and then they went ahead and did basically what happened.
Any questions? Mrs. Lee?
I'm just going to piggyback on what Joyce and Bill and Sal said. As someone who's going through the certification process to teach in Connecticut, one of the first things that you learn is that grading is subjective, and that latitude is given to teachers in their classroom, and exceptions have to be made. Sometimes students encounter hiccups in life that might affect their academic progress, and it's discretionary. It's between the teacher and the student, and this is the way it's pretty much always been done, and it is different depending upon the teacher. So I'm sorry that so many parents got upset by it, but it is nothing new, and Danbury High School didn't do anything wrong. I actually want to thank everybody at Danbury High School who put in all this time, especially Dr. Rossi.
James?
I'm not a fan of giving something for nothing. And regardless of what grades are subjective, if you look at our kids leaving the high school going to a college, they're already taking remedial courses, and courses that don't matriculate towards the degree because they're below standards for college. So, and the other part of that, if the students aren't aware that you're supporting them, how are you supporting them? They weren't aware of these changes until after the fact. You have staff that's not supporting the decisions made, and what I hear wasn't as smooth as we're saying that they are. So, they were. So I don't see how this was, you know, a good decision on behalf of the students, because if you're giving something nothing and they're already having trouble with the higher education piece, are we doing them any good? No, because you're telling them, okay, if you don't do anything, I'm gonna give you 50%. And they go to college, they're gonna look for that 50%, and they're gonna have a 0. So saying that it's subjective is okay, I don't agree with that, because the student needs to be educated so they can skip the remedial courses and go straight into their program. I don't see how this helps by saying, okay, after the fact, after they've taken it, well, we decided we're going to change it from a 0 to 50. I've never seen that done, and I've been in Danbury, I've been in the school system. If I did nothing, I got nothing. So I don't agree with this. I'm sorry.
Mr. Patterson?
Okay, I can talk to you about that, how it's been done. But it has been done. When you put an F on a student's grade, when I was teaching, generally when it was recorded by whoever was doing recording and mathematically, even when I was here, I'm almost out 8 years now. If teachers knew it was going in as a 50 for the reasons given. Do you want them to come in carry in 1/4? Do you want to give the student a chance to get and pass? Believe me, even with a 50, if the student improved. It was no easy matter to go from a 50 to come and get your average up to 67. Okay, you're not talking about something here that is injuring people going to MIT or Harvard, where grade points of a fraction are going to decide whether you're admitted or not. Okay, but I want you to, maybe it wasn't understood, but the thing is, teachers knew when I was there that whatever grade I get, if I put down a 40, I knew it was going in as a 50. I knew that's what it was going. Okay? So it's been done for some time is what I'm saying, but you may not.
But do you, right, if you could
Okay,
add.
but the reason for it, I agree, I was not known as an easy grader, I don't know if you know that, but, or an easy teacher, but the thing is, I felt that it was fair in the sense that we're dealing with young people and we want to give them a chance to improve. The 67, the person got the grade up to 67 from a 50, and got, managed to pass with a miracle D, probably still need remedial work. Okay, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Okay, so I mean, it's a question of philosophy there.
But MIT and Harvard,
No,
they
but I
don't
want you,
need that.
no, but I want you to realize it's not something that happened, and I think the majority, when I was there, the majority of the staff felt this was fair. I won't say everybody, a lot of people, some people felt just what you're saying too. Okay, it's never been, people are going to differ on this. The thing I wanted to ask is, when we reported to the state on these midterm final test results, did we report what the students got on the 20% and all, or did we report it as explained here, that if it didn't help the grade, that the average would be by the first report?
I sent all the letters up, the newspaper articles, the criticism, as well as this, so they had the whole story.
Yeah, and I get the understanding, they understood, and it wasn't perfect, but they understood, and they felt that it was what we said, we're trying to make it as least harmful and yet as fair as possible in a situation where, I'll be honest with you, maybe we shouldn't have had them involved. Now, but this is second guessing, this is, Monday night quarterbacking. Like I said, looking at it now, maybe we shouldn't have had them, but it doesn't help.
There was a very strong feeling that the exam had to be given at that time, and so there was that weight, that conversation. But, you said something that resonates in what you said about the equity and fairness. The real travesty up at that high school was not this grading system. The real travesty up at that high school had been the multiple levels of courses that kids were going through, making assumptions, they were learning content and categories of knowledge that clearly was being taught to them. There were various levels of students learning at various numbers of items, much less in algebra courses, geometry courses, physics courses. Kids weren't even doing quadratic equations, and they were doing algebra. They weren't doing the physics, they were doing watered down. There was real issues, and that is real. It's not the grades, it's what you're asking kids to do when they come to your classroom. Now, when you take the SATs, you put your name on it and you get 200 points. I mean, it's not an uncommon thing that is done. But when you teach high school and you do the things as Bob's talking about, kids will fall behind if they feel there isn't any way to succeed, and they will drop out. This NCLB was looked at as a dropout specialist. You notice the dropout year went up to 17 in Connecticut because we were losing a lot more kids. But I think that if you would hold us to a task, it would be, what are you doing to challenge the students so when they get into it, whether it's a community college or MIT or WestCon, are they taking regular courses there? And I will tell you that that the university system is looking at the work that WestCon's doing with Bethel and Danbury for offering less remedial classes to our students that are matriculating in there, because they've taken it on now for the last 7 years. So I think there's been a number of things, Rachel, to really be honest and truthful to kids about what they're learning. And if they're not learning, what are you doing about it? And that high school, that redesign was an attempt. That's why Cambridge came in here and said, you've got a dual system here. You've got those kids that are doing extremely well, doing the Harvards, and then you got these kids here that are having a watered down experience. Now, all the good intentions, The people there were working hard. I'm not saying they weren't. It was just the expectations that this is what these youngsters could do. We had to change those expectations. This would have never happened this way, the grading system, but the 50 was there whether this happened or not. That's a whole different part of the conversation that's been institutionalized for a long time, right or wrong and indifferent. But as far as this went, the weighting and that, this was, I think the board needs to know if there was something done here that was illegal, unethical, or against the policy, we'd have to rectify it. I don't see anything to rectify here, myself. And I hope we don't have these kind of days in the future to do this, but, you know, I don't want to go through this again. Nobody does.
Mrs. Molinaro.
I just want to commend the high school. I think they did the best that they could under the circumstances. My problem is that maybe in this particular instance, there may have been too much communication. I just think that a letter went out, a meeting occurred, you had another tiny meeting with certain students, and they went out with another communique. I just think that that's what happened. The communication piece was handled very, very poorly. Had one letter gone out or one mass communique, then it would have been fine. But under the circumstances, there was just too much communication in this particular instance.
The oddity, if there was one more day of snow days, they're going to cancel the whole thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that was those conversations. If they had one more day, it was that serious.
And there's another piece of the communication.
We would have had to communicate.
Right.
Well, what I would say is that the communication, the one criticism I have here is the communication was inconsistent. So because some students came to the board meeting and were spoken to afterwards, which is okay to reach out to people who have a concern, but we need to create a reasonable expectation that everyone knows what's going on. Sometimes it's impossible when you have last minute and snow days come up at the last minute and back and forth, but I think it's important that everyone at least had a reasonable expectation of what it is that's happening. And I think that was what I was most concerned with. I think generally, if the policy was included in the packet, you know, we generally leave these things to the superintendent's discretion. We purposely make our policies broad so that the superintendent is in charge of executing the policy and making sure that there's a fairness for everybody. I'm satisfied given the communication with the state. I'm very happy that the superintendent reached out to the state just to get their opinion, to alleviate any concerns that people might have of any impropriety or you know, any inappropriateness. I think the state's response kind of helps that, but I think it's important that you reached out to get an independent observation of what actually took place. And I'm pretty confident with that. As for the 50, you know, if I went to my job and did 50% of the work, I wouldn't get paid 50%. I'd get paid 0 because I would be fired. If I did that in school and I got consistent 50s, or maybe I raised it up to a 65 if I was lucky because I got the 50, I'm still not going to get into most colleges, if any college, because it's just not good enough. And you know, I don't accept that as a parent, whether it's a 0, 50, or 60. And you know, we need to have high standards for our children, and you know, giving out a 50, you can go either way on that, but I think that a 50 really doesn't do any favors to anybody. And the only criticism I would have of that is just take the opposite scale, where someone's got 100 all year long, and they go into the last exam and they know that it's only 10%. So guess what? I'm just going to stay home and I'll get a 50. So my average goes down to a 92. You know, that's not encouraging the right behavior, but then again, I don't know if there'd be too many people who actually would do that. But it's possible. But I think the opposite argument really doesn't hold, because we would be encouraging people to slack off at the end, if that's what they're doing.
There are schools that, as a final, taking that under consideration, when you have a 40-40-20, that if a student is in that category of where the exam is not going to move that grade above an 8 or 9, they don't take the exam. They're excused with that. It's not, the kid that's intrinsically going to do it is going to do it, going to sit down and going to take the exam. The idea here was to try to prevent that student from getting so discouraged that, in fact, they're just not going to come to school and they're just going to not perform. And if you sit in the classroom trying to have order in the class with the kids not participating, it's problematic. So, you know, I guess I see the qualitative side of that. That's helpful.
Yeah, and just the last thing I would say, again, in any large building, you're gonna get people who aren't, especially something like this, that could have gone a couple of different ways. And sure, we could have picked really evil alternatives, but you're gonna get in a building of 1,000 or several hundred employees, teachers, et cetera, several thousand parents, you're gonna get people who don't agree with what you're doing, because that's just the nature of it. It isn't always a black and white area, and there's shades of gray, but we try and do what's best for as many people as possible without being unfair to anybody. And I think this the biggest criticism I still have is with the communication, where some people had knowledge, some didn't, and I think that just that doesn't sit well with me. But other than that, I think I'm comfortable. This is the
I was just gonna say that, you know, students aren't put into remedial college classes because of Bob gave them a 50 instead of 0. They're put into remedial college classes, having taught them myself, because they lack a basic skill set in that subject, and they need the extra time in the remedial class to catch up to everything else. They lack a basic
So
skill set.
that's nothing new, I know that part, but giving them 50 for doing nothing doesn't say, hey, stop doing nothing and do something so you can get a grade. If they do nothing, I'll give you a grade anyway.
Well, I'm not saying that it's a perfect grading system, but it is subjective, and it has always been subjective. I would have preferred that they not take a midterm at all, but from what I understand from Dr. Rossi, that couldn't be because we're a district and we need improvement, correct?
Well, they embedded specifically new curricular items and sample questions. That was a part of it. The other part of it, the teachers felt that, you know, we taught this because expected the exam, we're giving the exam. I mean, so it wasn't, as we said, there wasn't 100% agreement on this at all. But that was part of it.
Mrs. Cooper, Jameson.
Yes, my own comment is that no matter what we do, we should make sure that we are fair, being fair to all students. And for a couple of students to come in here and bring the information that they brought before the board, and then we go out and decide that, you know, we want to change things, again, I feel like it should not have gotten to that point. So it's to that point, it's over, and right now, it's over and done with. And we hope the next decision that we make, and including the decision that when something like this is going to happen, that, you know, Dr. Rossi will have a discussion with you to make sure that we can at least contact everyone that needs to be contacted when we do something like this. I think it causes an uproar when people do not know what's happening. And again, a part of that is communication, and I'm not going to say it's all communication. You know, some of it is other things, and I won't go into that. But my main thing is to make sure that we treat all students fair and be just to them. And that's all that I care about, and that's the only reason that I'm sitting here. Okay? And I know everyone don't have and feel the same way I do, because I've been here long enough to know that.
Any further discussion? No, seeing none. Move on to our information item